we kind of carved off China. We're like, okay, this one is extremely complex and has its own dynamics. But there isn't quite as much like that in Japan or South Korea or Russia. So we started focusing on those this year, and our theory is that if we can show that we as a Western company can succeed in a place where basically no other Western companies have, then that'll give us the momentum, I think, to figure out the right partnerships or things that we would need to do in China to succeed on our terms. On the philosophical question of openness and how we view it, my view on this is that every country is pretty different, and we want to be pretty culturally sensitive to them. So I don't want Facebook to be an American company, right? I mean, obviously we're in America, but I don't want it to be this company that just spreads American values all across the world. I mean, we have our core values. We believe in openness and transparency and connecting people. And there are parts of that overlap with American values. But there are different countries across the world that have different values, right? So, for example, we have this notion of free speech that we really love and support at Facebook, and that's one of the main things that we're trying to push with openness. But different countries have their different standards around that, right? So, for example, in Germany, it is illegal to post anything that is Nazi content, right? So what do? We don't allow you to post Nazi content in Germany, right? It's considered hate speech. They have a different standard for what hate speech is in Germany. Is that censoring? I don't think so. I think you can make an argument that it is, but I think it's clearly the right thing to do. We don't block Nazi content outside of Germany. In Pakistan this year, one of our users made a group, Everybody Draw Muhammad Day. And in Pakistan, it's illegal to draw pictures depicting Muhammad. So we got blocked in Pakistan. And then we had some dialogue with them, and it's against the law there. So we don't let people post pictures of Muhammad in Pakistan. But we let people do that anywhere else in the world where it's not against the law. So that's our take on this. I think it's really important that countries can clearly write down what their laws are. Not everyone is happy with what we do in all these different places. So I mean, we get complaints in Germany from people who want to post Nazi content. Someone in Pakistan right now is trying to get me sentenced to death. No joke, right? I mean, maybe kind of a joke, but but I don't think it's that funny. For our philosophy there, in terms of not blocking people from drawing pictures of Muhammad across the world. So anyhow, my view on this is that you want to be really culturally sensitive and understand the way that people actually think. China's I think the values there are somewhat different from what we have in the US. So before we do anything there, I'm personally spending a lot of time kind of studying it and figuring out what I think the right thing to do is. Just as kind of a personal challenge this year, I'm just taking an hour a day and I'm learning Chinese. I'm just kind of trying to understand the language, the culture, the mindset, all this, because it's such an important part of the world, right? How can you connect the whole world if you leave out 1.6 billion people?
All right, let's take a question from the center. Are you in the green polo shirt? Yes, you.
What is your attitude towards making acquisitions? When you look for a company to acquire, do you expect the number of acquisitions Facebook makes to increase in the future?
Yeah, so we've made a lot of acquisitions over the last couple of years, and it's actually one of the things that I think is working pretty well for us. So we have a specific thesis on how to do this, which is we have not once bought a company for the company. We buy companies to get excellent people. So look, our view is we want to build a very entrepreneurial company. One thing that McKinsey has this program where people go after college expecting to only be there for a couple of years and expecting to pick up very valuable business skills that they can take whatever they want to do after that. I want Facebook to be the McKinsey of entrepreneurship, right? Where you come to Facebook because it's the best place to learn how to build things, and there's a lot of leverage in terms of making it so that you can build something in your first week or over your first months if you want to have a longer project, and you can work on getting it ramped up, and you can address a large user base and getting people to use your product. So I think in order to have a really entrepreneurial culture, one of the key things is to make sure that we're recruiting the best people who are very entrepreneurial. And a lot of our attitude towards that is that a lot of the best people, I think, want to come to Facebook because of the culture that we have, and because we just have enormous leverage, right? I can't think of another company where the ratio of users to engineers is, each engineer services more than 1 million users. But one of the ways to do this is to focus on acquiring great companies with great founders. And I think we've probably done maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of them in the last year or so. And I've been happy with how every single one of them has worked. So to me, that suggests that we should do a lot more of them. And a lot of it is like the teams come in, they work on projects that they're passionate about. It's not necessarily an extension of what they were doing at their startup. I think the calculus on the startup founder side a lot of the time is, okay, I'm working on this project and I'm really excited about it, but if I go to Facebook, I can have a much bigger impact. And whether it's Brett Taylor, who started off and originally did some of the platform stuff and is now CTO, or Blake Ross and Joe Hewitt, who joined us from Parakeet, who Blake went on to do a lot of the internationalization and growth work that we did, and Joe is working on a lot of the mobile stuff. He built the original iPhone app and is working on some really cool mobile stuff that we're doing now. Who bought this company Nextstop, right? It's one of the things that I think is awesome. And the fact that so many of the people who are leading products within Facebook are coming from environments where they were most recently at a startup as a founder just creates an incredibly entrepreneurial environment at a scale where you can build stuff that millions of people are going to be using.
All right, Paul says the time is up, right? We got to end, so
cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I just go down here? All right. That's a good one.
It's hot. It's up to you.
All right, everyone. Last talk. Don't move. Don't go anywhere, because we have specifically chosen Brian Chesky of Airbnb as today's closer, because we know him, and we know the Airbnb story in great detail because we funded him a couple years ago, and he's got a lot of great stuff to tell you. So please welcome Brian Chesky.
Dual play.
I believe so. That's kind of
all right. I have. Okay. Hey guys, can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you for waiting it out. And today, I'm basically going to talk about the first 1,000 days of Airbnb. And when I got the email from Paul Graham, he asked me to speak, and I said, all right, well, what should I talk about? And Paul said, you should talk about when you were powerless and obscure. So I'm going to talk about when I was powerless and obscure. And a lot of those 1,000 days, I was powerless and obscure. So let's start. 2 years ago, I went to startup school. And it was in Stanford. It was in a different auditorium. And TechCrunch wrote a post here. Jason Kincaid did a story. And look at the photo. You'll probably see if you can recognize somebody. So I'm going to blow this photo up. You probably still can't recognize somebody because I know it's really pixelated. But now you can. So that's me, powerless and obscure, in the audience 2 years ago. And I guess the central theme of my talk today is, if I really think it's not impossible to be on stage 2 years from now. And you'll see from my story, it's not impossible. So let's start. So the story starts back in 2004. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I went with my co-founder and my best friend at RISD, Joe Gebbia. And the day of graduation, Joe looks at me and he says, Brian, I think we're going to start a company together. So I said, well, I already have a job. I'll see you. So I went to Los Angeles, and poor Joe was stuck back in Providence, Rhode Island. But literally 1,000 days ago, and it was weird when I was constructing the title, it was like 1,040 days. So October 2007, 1,000 days ago, he calls me up, and he says he's got this apartment, his roommate has moved out, and he says, Brian, let's start a company. And I said, okay, let's start a company. So I literally quit my job, I left my house, I left all my possessions, I even broke up my girlfriend, but I was probably going to do that one anyways. And I drove up to San Francisco, and Joe tells me the rent's $1,150, and I have $1,000 in the bank account. And I said, I probably should have asked about that before I moved up. So it turns out that weekend, an international design conference was coming to San Francisco, and all the hotels were sold out. And at RISD, it's Rhode Island School of Design, it's an art school, they really teach you that creativity can solve problems. If you're creative and you identify an everyday problem that you deal with, you can actually solve that. And for us, this was a problem. And part of it was making rent, but part of it is we just wanted to solve the problem with a creative solution. And in literally 30 minutes, we built this as we were talking. And I don't know, I'm not here to give lessons except to say if you have an idea, just put something out there in 20, 30 minutes. Don't worry how bad it looks. And our first launch, our first of many, was this. And this is a site that 2 designers had built. Looks pretty modest today. We ended up hosting 3 people from around the world. Amol actually came from India. Catherine was a 35-year-old woman from Boston. And Michael, that's not Michael, I just got a 45-year-old guy from Google News. I couldn't actually find the photo of Michael. But anyways, this guy, this 45-year-old father of 5 from Utah slept on an airbed in my living room. Well, we came up with the idea it would be an airbed and breakfast because all the hotels are sold out. It wasn't going to be a designer. We wanted to originally do a design bed and breakfast, but I actually didn't have any furniture. Remember, I had moved up there. But Joe said he had some airbeds, and that's where the name came to. So I decided that I would chronicle our 1,000 days through traffic. And so this was our first launch. And a couple months later, South by Southwest was coming up. And we decided, why don't we build a site where you can basically provide airbeds for conferences all over the United States. We'll do what we did for that conference for conferences all over the country. And it turned out that launching for South by Southwest, we thought, would be the best time to do it because that is basically one of the preeminent tech events in the country. I asked Joe, I said, Joe, who's the best engineer you know? He said his old roommate Nate is. And so in March of 2008, we did our second launch. And it looked like this: airbeds for conferences. And that's our traffic. So that was our second launch. A few months had gone by. And 3 things happened at that conference. The first thing is I show up, and by the way, we didn't have payments at the time. So I show up, and I forgot to go to the ATM. So I show up to this guy's house. He lets me in. We have dinner together. And then he says, all right, he's kind of uncomfortable. He's like, all right, it's going to be $200. And I'm like, oh, can I get to you tomorrow? And it was really awkward. And here I am, a guy, some stranger now, sleeping in his living room. And he's like, what the hell did I get myself into here? The second thing happened is I met a couple people, and one of the people said, Brian, I'd love to go use your product. I'm going to London, but there's no conference. So we said, that's kind of limiting. Why should it only be for conferences? And the third thing is we met this guy right here, Michael Seibel. Michael Seibel is the CEO of Justin.tv. Before we came up here, I didn't know anything about even Y Combinator, TechCrunch. I was an industrial designer working out of Los Angeles. And Michael basically informally brought us into the YC community. I'm not sure if I should tell you to reach out to YC alumni without going through the program, but I actually did. It worked out really well. Michael basically channeled his inner Paul Graham. He was basically giving us advice, taught us the YC methodology. We called him the God Founder. And so in the summer of 2008, we did our third launch. And it's kind of similar to what you see today. You type in a city, you find a listing, you find it on a map. In fact, that was our room photo. You notice it's the same size as the person. Well, Craigslist photos are that size.